Generals Grant and Lee over to my right. Big round of applause for them. Two great leaders. Two men who came to respect each other greatly, even though they obviously had great differences. That's something we can all learn from today. Gentlemen, thank you. General Grant, of course, an Ohio boy. You can go and see his birthplace. Our next speaker is Tessa Kelman. Oh, I'm sorry. Darlene Richardson. Forgive me. Darlene Richardson is here, and we're very lucky to have her. She is the National Veterans Affairs Historian.
I get this down on my level. It's always a pleasure to come to Dayton. It's a beautiful campus, and it's probably our second historic facility since the Civil War. This year, the VA celebrates the 150th anniversary of the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. Initially, it was called the National Asylum. Asylum had a different meaning in the middle 19th century, but they later changed the name. When you're here on this campus, it's hard to imagine America without veterans hospitals, but it wasn't always so. We didn't always have veterans hospitals. And for those of you who wonder, how did these veterans hospitals come about? It happened during the second year of the American Civil War. The U.S. Sanitary Commission had been charged with taking care of the volunteer soldiers. There were two different groups of soldiers. You had the regulars, who were the lifers. They signed up for 5 years, 5-year terms, and these were the guys who spent their entire lives in the military. Then you had the volunteer soldiers. These were temporary guys. They were farmers and bakers and railroad workers. They signed up for 3 months or 6 months, a year, or until the end of the war. And the American Civil War was won largely because of the volunteer soldiers. And as the U.S. Sanitary Commission was taking care of them, they realized that a lot of these fellows, there were a lot of amputations during during the Civil War, and they realized that these guys would not be able to return home to be farmers and factory workers and such. And they started to wonder, well, I wonder what other countries are doing for their disabled veterans. So they sent a sociologist over to Europe in the second year of the Civil War, and he conducted a study of numerous countries and wrote down what they did, and came back, and the Perkins Report in 1863 gave some suggestions for what America should do. And they developed two camps of thought. One was to extend pensions. Can you imagine life now? You just got a nice big pension, and you had to deal with getting your own medical care off of the pension. But there were a number of U.S. sanitary workers who fought to have a national institution for these volunteers to go to. The regulars had a couple of facilities of their own that were government financed. They were the U.S. Naval Asylum in Philadelphia and the U.S. Soldiers Home in Washington, D.C. But you had to serve at least 20 years to get into those. And the volunteers just didn't serve 20 years. So they needed their own institution. And there was a little Spitfire lady from New Hampshire. She was part of the U.S. Sanitary Commission. And Miss Delphine P. Baker. And she even started a newspaper to start a ground roots movement to get interested in developing a national asylum. She had the ear of General Grant and several members of Congress. And in the final weeks of Congress in 1865, there was a Massachusetts Senator, Henry Wilson. He was able to put forth a bill and got it approved unanimously. And the National Asylum was authorized, signed into law by President Lincoln. It had a rough start, and they really had no model to build from, because they agreed that nothing that they saw in Europe was what they envisioned. They wanted to, since a large number of the volunteers were recent immigrants, who had no family. They needed a place to let them learn to be retrained for jobs. They needed to provide an institution where they could work or live for the rest of their lives because they had no place else to go. So by 1873, we had 4 beautiful branches. The first one was opened in Maine. Dayton was actually the 3rd that was selected, but it was the 2nd to open. Then there was Milwaukee and one in Hampton. By 1905, which was the peak year for Civil War soldiers living at the national homes, they took care of over 30,000 that year, and that was the peak. After that, they started to decline. There was a question as to whether the national homes would even continue. But World War I actually saved the national homes. Society had changed at that time. Right after the Civil War, the volunteer soldiers, they were young guys. By World War I, they were old fellows. And the national homes were looked upon as like, the old folks' home. And they didn't want to provide those. They didn't want the World War II veterans going into there with the older fellows. So they created new institutions, new agencies. And it was a really interesting and confusing time between World War I and 1930 when they decided to merge the old systems and the new system together to create the Veterans Administration. And the Veterans Administration was actually a hybrid of both. They built new hospitals on the old national homes, and they discovered that the national homes had actually done a lot of things right. And they decided to build domiciliaries, long-term care facilities, and everything on the Veterans Administration hospitals. So by 1948, all of the national homes had become Veterans Administration hospitals. And since then, the system has grown to include 150 veterans hospitals. We have a total of over 1,000 different facilities, including outpatient centers, women's health centers, mobile clinics, and such. I'd like to mention a quote from General Benjamin Butler, who was the first president of the National Homes. This was in 1868. He said, "Everything has been done to make this institution what it should be, a home for these disabled men to which they shall become attached, and in which they shall find every comfort and convenience to make them contented and happy during their lives, or to fit them, if they choose and are capable, for employment elsewhere, by which their pensions they make themselves independent and useful citizens." We began as the National Home for Civil War Soldiers. We continue, after 150 years, to be the home for medical care for the nation's veterans. Veterans from every single American war have been treated at national homes or Veterans Administration or Department of Veterans Affairs hospitals. And all of the original, there were 11 national homes, all of them have operated continuously. They're all still open, and they are icons of our history and our devotion to our American veterans. And I'd just like to leave you with that. We have 150 years of unrivaled expertise. We love our veterans, we have the experience, and we hope to continue to do it for another 150 years. Thank you.
Darlene, thanks so much for coming out to be with us. Now, Tessa Kelman is the Visual Information Specialist with the Dayton Veteran Affairs Medical Center. Tessa.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. Darlene gave us a really great background on the beginnings of the VA system in those years just following the Civil War. What I'd like to do for you today is to paint you a picture of what this particular campus used to look like in those early years. Soon after, President Abraham Lincoln signed the act into law that created the National Home System. The Board of Managers selected 3 sites for the initial homes. Dayton being one of those sites. Where we now stand used to be farmlands. They were purchased using funds from both the U.S. government and the citizens of Dayton. This facility opened in September of 1867 and was known as the Central Branch of the National Soldiers' Home. The site was chosen primarily for its proximity to a city, natural spring waters, railroad access, and high open ground in order to provide good ventilation. By the mid-1970s, the Dayton Soldiers' Home had become quite the grand place. Military bands played nightly concerts in this very gazebo, and the veterans marched in formation on the parade grounds around us to entertain visitors and dignitaries. By 1884, the Central Branch accounted for nearly 64% of all veterans that received institutional care by the U.S. government, making it the largest facility of its kind in the world. It had become a small city of sorts, with living and dining quarters, many types of workshops, farms including a dairy, a general store, a post office, a hotel and restaurant, a train depot, 2 chapels, a hospital, a power plant, a cemetery, and for a short time, even its own beer hall. In the beginning, the objective was to provide a home-like atmosphere for the veterans, not just basic necessities, but also to offer an opportunity for leisure activities. The building that houses the Military Museum and the Office for the American Veterans Heritage Center was once a library for the veterans, and it was considered to be one of the finest in the state at the time. A clubhouse, an amusement hall, and a magnificent 1,500-seat concert hall were also built for the veterans' enjoyment. Visitors were encouraged to come to the Soldiers' Home to honor the Civil War veterans. Day trips and picnic excursions by railroad were organized in the 1870s. The Dayton Soldiers' Home, with its intricate flower gardens, lovely grotto, lakes, and manicured lawns, were advertised in promotional leaflets as the most popular travelers' resort west of the Allegheny Mountains. In 1910, the number of visitors here swelled to over 660,000 people annually, which was 6 times the population of Dayton at the time. One of the more popular attractions here was the lush and exotic grotto area, where man-made stoneworks and natural springs formed waterfalls and drinking pools and fed the small man-made lakes that we still have today. Veterans would give visitors boat rides around the lakes, and for their entertainment, deer, birds, and even trained bears were kept on display. It's always fun to mention that we had several small ponds that were steam heated in order to support several live alligators. Now, although the alligators are gone, we hope, the grotto has been restored to much of its former glory. One of the buildings here worth special mention is the Protestant Chapel. It was built in 1868 and is the oldest church in the VA system. The chapel is made of limestone that was quarried here on the grounds and built by some of the resident Civil War veterans. It attracted a number of dignitaries to speak, including President Ulysses S. Grant in 1870, when he came to dedicate the Soldiers' Monument over in the National Cemetery, and the father of our famous Wright brothers, Bishop Milton Wright, who occasionally preached sermons from the chapel's pulpit as a guest pastor. Though some of the buildings I've described here are gone, many historic structures still remain. And in 2012, the National Park Service designated the Dayton VA as a National Historic Landmark. Currently, efforts are underway to establish on these grounds a National Archives facility for the Department of Veterans Affairs, using 2 of our historic structures, the Veterans Clubhouse and the Headquarters Building over across the street to my right. If you'd like to learn more about the history and view the many wonderful photos of the time periods I've described, I'd encourage you to visit our online museum. If you Google Dayton VA Virtual Museum, you will find a link to it. The site features an 1885 virtual tour of the grounds, an exhibit gallery with hundreds of old photos, and information on the preservation of the Dayton VA Historic District. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of the festival.